Here we're going to talk about the agent's enforcement rent. To understand that, we're going to have to compare two different scenarios. We're going to compare what happens at the Nash equilibrium of the incomplete contract with what happens at an alternative where the agent would be receiving their fallback utility. And that means they'd be at their participation constraint rather than their incentive compatibility constraint. So let's see how that works. Here we have a figure which is similar to what we had previously. You can see that we have the agent's best response function. We also have the ISO value curve that they receive at the Nash equilibrium at the best response, on the best response function at the Nash at point N. But we've also added a second ISO value curve. And that ISO value curve is the ISO value curve that the agent would receive if they were to have zero utility. So let's think about this. At the Nash, we must remember that Patricia pays Armin enough so that he wants to avoid termination. What we then want to think about is we want to ask how much less Armin could be paid and still be no worse off than at his fallback option. Okay, so here we want to think about it's a hypothetical alternative, right? So it's not actually occurring at the Nash, but it's a hypothetical alternative where instead of being at the utility he gets at the Nash, he's going to be getting utility equal to his fallback position. Remember that utility is 0. So to see that, we can see a comparison of the ISO value at the Nash versus the ISO value where his utility or his value is 0. Okay? And you'll see that we're using a term called the participation constraint. The participation constraint is the constraint that says this is enough that will get you to participate in an interaction because it is equal to, well, greater than or equal to what you would receive at your next best alternative. So if we're thinking about that as just a little bit more than the next best alternative, that's sometimes how we think about it, but we typically set it with equality equal to the next best alternative because it's showing us the limiting case. So, in terms of the agent's enforcement rent, what we have to think about here is that we're imagining moving left and lowering the price from point N. So, at point N, we see we have the price Pn equal to 4 U underbar. And then we're moving further and further left towards point C, where the price is decreasing to 2 U bar. What we can then see is that we're eventually going to hit the participation constraint at V sub 0 equal to 0. Okay, so V sub 0, that is the ISO value curve where the agent's utility is equal to 0. He receives no rent at point C. But what we can see is if we compare the ISO value curve where he has 0 utility with the point where he has the utility he receives at the Nash equilibrium, that is a measure for us horizontally of the size of the rent. So this means that Armin's enforcement rent is the distance between point N and point C. In this case, it's 2 U underbar. Okay, U underbar being the at least the minimum amount of disutility that he incurs in order to get working. So that's V4 minus V0. So what we can see there is that the people who have contracts get this enforcement rent. So Armin, when he has a contract with Patricia, he gets an enforcement rent of 2 U underbar.